for your wonderful loving grace in our lives. And amidst the issues that we're facing today, we know that you are still there and you are in control. And we just want to know how we can fall in step with you and fall in step with the Holy Spirit to do whatever we can, minister to our people and to be who we should be for your kingdom's sake. Pray that you'll bless us now as together. Thank you for Gary Hartke, who's going to be sharing with us. Give him freedom, we pray, and may whatever he has to say encourage us and give us some guidance, perhaps, in a direction that will help us. Thank you for our DS. We pray you'll continue to bless his life as he leads us. For everything, we give you praise and glory in the strong name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Right. It is a privilege to have Dr. Gary Hartke with us. My time with Dr. Hartke goes way back, and he was very young, and I was already getting old. And so he serves our denomination in a role that I want to tell you is probably more stressful than any role maybe we have. And I just think that I know we have the right man for that job. And I just thought having the opportunity to have him share anything with us would be great. And again, I think maybe at the end we'll have possibly a question and answer time. So start thinking about that. And again, I want to remind everybody that we are recording, and since we've got a lot of people who are unable to be here. Gary, I have just made you the host, so you should be able to share and do everything you need. Thank you.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. Really am encouraged to be with you today. I'm going to share my screen here with you, and what I'm talking about today is just the journey I've been on as a leader in the church. And my journey included being a youth pastor / a lot of other things over 15 years. And then I was the candidate coordinator in World Mission for 2 years, moved to Kansas City in 1998, served 18 years as the director of youth ministry, NYI, for the denomination. And now for just a year and a half have been in the role of general secretary. And I think in the last 5 years, through some further education, I began to grapple with my leadership model for myself. How do I lead well? And I've been working on some ideas that have been helpful to me. And so I'm just going to share them with you and going to break them up into 2 parts. I'm going to share an initial part and then leave our 20 minutes or whatever for the questions and answer, and then wrap up with a few slides that I hope will encourage you today. So it's an honor to be with you. Glad we could be together by Zoom. I did strip out and some pictures that don't have copyright permission for public sharing. They would be okay for private, but so it's going to look a little blank today. But can you just want to verify you can see the PowerPoint? Okay. So I want you to take a moment, just think back to your first leadership experience in the church. What was the first thing you remember someone asking you to do in the church? We just take a moment and think about that. If you can remember that first experience, would you just put a little sentence in the chat? If the chat is enabled for this Zoom call, just put a sentence or 2 in the chat about what summarizes your first leadership experience in the church. What was the first responsibility you remember being given? we'll look at those here in a bit, but I think about this in my daily work just to remember how significant our work is as we connect with other people. And this was driven by a story I heard from one of our NYI leaders 5 or 6 years ago. We were talking about leadership in the church. And he said when he was a young boy, the pastor called him and said, I have a need in the church. So we sing hymns on Sunday morning, and everyone needs a hymnal as they come into the church. They didn't have pews to stick them in every Sunday or back in the day, whenever they held their services. Said, I need somebody to stand at the door and to pass out hymnals and make sure everybody gets a hymnal when they walk into church on Sunday. Said, would you be willing to do that? And as he tells it, and I believe him, you know, he was 4 or 5 years old, just probably could hold 3 hymnals and then had to grab more. But he said he latched onto that and was the first one up in his family on Sunday, got it, made sure his parents were ready. He said, I've got to be to church early today because the pastor needs me to pass out hymnals. And he grew into this role and faithfully every Sunday passed out the hymnals, collected them every week, made sure they were in the right spot for the next Sunday. And so in his leadership model, whenever I would travel with him, he would always, when we were with in crowds where there were children, he would ask them, you know, tell me, you know, what is it that you do in the church? How do you serve the church? And this was driven by his experience of a young child being so impacted by a pastor that said, I need you to help make this service successful. It's the way he's driven now as a leader. For me, I did not grow up in the Church of the Nazarene. I started at age 15, and I was very resistant and reluctant to join the youth group. So my first leadership responsibility is a clear memory for me. When I was 15, I was being forced to go to church by my parents. I was one of those kids trying to make everybody miserable in the church and fairly successful at it. And as rude and obnoxious as I could be for someone to disinvite me, and nobody ever did. But the youth worker in the church invited me one day to go pick up chocolate bars. And this is one of the pictures I had to take off of the of this because it's not, I won't share it on video, but I'll show you. There's a mid-1970s AMC Pacer, if you remember these cars. They only lasted a few years, and there's a reason why. You can do an internet search and see why they didn't last very long. Ugly, it was not an impressive car for a youth worker to have. It wasn't loud, fast, sleek. It was like a fishbowl inverted. But he said, hey, the youth group's doing a fundraiser. I need to go pick up chocolate bars and I need you to help me. And so even though I wasn't in the youth group, I don't know what I was thinking, took pity on this man that he was so lonely. He was reaching out to me for help, but I went with him and had a great chat along the way. But it gave me this unforgettable impression of the value of non-threatening opportunities to connect with people that I've seen play out in my leadership life throughout the years. So I first just value the importance of reflecting back on our leadership experience. And of course, that first experience was the beginning of a journey for me into what became a calling when I was in college. I'm working on 2 screens, so forgive me here as I bounce back and forth. Then along the years, I came across this piece of work, you know, Stephen Covey's book, First Things First. He talks about the 4 quadrants and talks about how we spend our time. And I began thinking about this when email became prevalent, and I was NYI director at the time, and in the early mid 90s this really began to pick up. When I came in 2000 and began as NYI director, email was really taking off around the world, and I found myself in the place where I wasn't thinking strategic about the day like I used to. I was just coming to work and opening my email to see what work I had to do for the day. And I remember that realization that I had, that I thought, oh my goodness, I have lost my strategic thinking. I've simply relied on my inbox to tell me what needed to be done for the day. Now, I had scheduled some things here and there, but I'd have to say that much of my strategic thinking of a leader was replaced because I knew I would have a slew of email during the day. And so Covey organizes these quadrants. Quadrant one is described as a firefighting quadrant, the things that come up that demand our attention, but it's putting out fires. And quadrant two, the quality time. I said that's really where we need to spend our time, but we spend little of it there because we're in 1, 3, and 4. 3 is the distraction quadrant, the things that take our focus away. 4 being the time wasting component. And email for me, and then later social media and all the ways the Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, all of the other ways people began to contact me. I had to be careful how I used my time. And so all this began to impact my daily journey. And it reminded me of this story of this young girl who was given a bow and arrow as a gift from her parents. And so that little girl, so excited, she goes outside and shoots an arrow and comes back in and says, mommy, you got to come see this. And the mommy goes out with her daughter, and lo and behold, the mom looks and there's an arrow in the side of the barn with a bullseye. And the mom looks at the daughter, says, how in the world did you get so good so fast? And the daughter said, well, Mom, I shot the arrow and then I took some paint and I drew a bullseye around it and got my perfect bullseye. And I felt like that is how many of us were leading our ministry. We were doing some good things, but I kind of got to the point where I felt like we were doing things and then we were drawing bullseyes around it and say, look at what we did this year. Isn't it really good? But I had lost what I felt was some of my strengths earlier on of really being thoughtful, reflective, strategic about a way forward. I read a book along this way by Samuel Smiles. He was a Scottish author and very involved in political thinking of the day in Scotland. He wrote a book in the 1800s called Character, and he's the one that developed a phrase that I'm sure you've heard often in various ways. And he said, a great leader says and he does the right thing in the right way and at the right time. And of course, in the 1800s, the he was very intentional here. We would use broader, inclusive language today, but he is the one that coined this phrase that a person of character, the premise of his book, is someone who says and does the right thing in the right way at the right time. And so this couple other pictures that I've taken out here that I'll just put in the statement, but there are 2 pictures I like to include when I tell this story. But it's a story of in Russia during the beginning of the Great Revolution. There was a great military presence in the streets. And John Bowling, in his book Graceful Leadership, tells this story. If you have that book, it's a great story. But a story of a Russian Orthodox priest walking down the street one day, and a Russian soldier stops him in all of the garb and armed and all of the things you would picture of a strong military presence, designed to threaten people, to intimidate people. And the Russian soldier stops the priest and says, "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" And the priest stops and says, "How much they pay you to ask me such things?" And the soldier says, 20 kopecks. And the priest says, "I'll pay you 20 kopecks if you'll stop me every day and ask me those same 2 questions. Who are you? And why are you here? And I began to wrestle with that in this leadership world. How do I navigate a world where people are pinging me from so many different directions? And at one point, there's this quadrant of the urgent where there are all these messages and all these various forms, but yet how do I lead well and effective? And I was really struggling with that. But I had to ask myself, who am I? What do I bring to this? Why does God put me in this role? What is it unique about me? Who am I? And why am I here? And really began to step back and think about my role as a leader. Great questions that I ask myself every day. So my leadership model, I'm still working on this, and I consider it still very rudimentary. I'm just sharing with you my journey. But every day when I come in and begin my day, and sometimes I start the day before, but I've taken these words of Samuel Smiles in his book Character, written in the 1800s, and developed this leadership model for myself that begins with calling, a deep sense of purpose of why I'm here. That also recognizes why I do some of the things I do. And there's a lot that lies beneath that. But part of that is my own leadership experience, whether good or bad. I tend to repeat that which was good for me. So I've had lots of times to involve people in non-threatening ways in my ministry, like my youth worker did with me, to go pick up chocolate bars. It seemed like a meaningless task that had a profound impact on my life. That's part of my leadership model that I recognize, but also understand that other people bring different calling to the table, a different experience and deep sense of purpose. So I list out 4 things. I don't list calling, but every day I list out competence, which says to me, a leader does the right thing, followed by character, for the right reason. And then I list commitment, at the right time, and connection in the right way. And when I look at these items, it just, before I list out any tasks of the day, I ask myself about competence. What are the best things I need to do today? What are the most important things I need to do today? Is there anything on my list from yesterday or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days that I've just keep pushing back? And it's because I'm just procrastinating. It's a hard thing I don't want to do. Not always. Sometimes I'm waiting on somebody else for something. I can't do it myself, or it's too fast, it's too soon, too early. But I ask myself, competence. What do I need to learn? How do I need to grow? How do I need to develop as a leader? Where am I deficient in my knowledge or my experience? This has become more important to me as I left the world where I was an expert after 18 years of the NYI ministry. I knew, I think over those 18 years, all about our history. I wrote the history of our organization. I lived it 18 years I knew a lot about NYI. And I moved into a world that I had observed here in the building, but had little competence in terms of daily life experience. I had a lot of learning to do. And in this, with competence, it addresses, do people believe I'm credible to do what I'm doing? And I'm sure a lot of people ask that about me. Is this person credible? Why are you doing what you're doing? Are you credible? And where I'm not credible, can they see what I'm doing to apply myself to develop that credibility, to develop that competence, to acknowledge areas where I'm not yet competent, but I say, I need to talk to someone who is competent. I had to live in that I'm still living in that in many ways with new things that come my way. I'm developing competence to be believable, to lead well, to know what the right thing is for us. The second one, character. For me, I evaluate my motives. I ask myself when I write this word down, I said, would any of you do anything different today than I will because of my character? is there something going on in my life, in my thinking, in my relationship with the people I'm working with that's going to influence how I lead? And it's a motive check. I ask myself, what am I doing here that somebody else might do differently? And if they're doing it differently, is it a character issue in me? And so character, am I going to work today in a way that builds trust? Will people trust me more at the end of the day today than yesterday because of my behavior? What they see, what they hear, will that make a difference? So the need for accountability speaks into this. To put myself, I work with a team of leaders intentionally and say, help me. I have blind spots like we all do, and I can't see. I see you out of my own experience, out of my own journey, out of my own learning, but you see things differently. And I found that to be a wonderful part of my day. And it's intentionally right there at the top, number 2. After the right thing, I check my motives. What's my character speaking into this? And what is it saying? Commitment for me, doing it at the right time, has to do with my sense of will, my sense of the willingness to do hard things, to do things at the right time. As I said earlier, is what is the most effective thing I can do today? And what is it about today that makes this the right time for this particular piece? And so I'm very careful to evaluate. And many times I go back through my previous days and I look at my lists of things, again, checking for what am I pushing off? And there are days I see I'm not doing something. It just wasn't very important, as important someday, or quadrant 1, 3, and 4 pushed out my quadrant 2 task. And then I have to stop and ask myself, is that okay? Or tomorrow, do I need to reorganize my schedule and my commitment to make sure I get things done that need to be done? The connection to me is about relationships. It's doing things in a way that creates the most momentum, that brings the most people along with me, that I try to do things in a winsome way and make sure I share vision and purpose and mission, always leading with mission so people understand that this is, what will this do for us? Why is this important to us right now? And what's the return we're going to see on this? And it's also a time as I connect with people to read how we're doing. Do people seem engaged in this? Or do I see some concern look? Do they become disinterested? This whole connection is an important feedback mechanism for me, verbally, non-verbally, just watching how people respond to what I'm doing is an important step for me every day. So this is really simple. You're going to be disappointed in this, but this is my daily model. I walk in, and this is my day one. Every month has its own list of things. So every day I have this simple planner. I put some scripture in the back that I'm focusing on the fruits of the Spirit right now. And I feel like with the COVID-19, I need to really focus on these fruits of the Spirit. So I keep that daily there. But then every day I write my name. I write the date. I know my name. I don't always know the date, especially in COVID time, but I know my name, but I write it every day. Why? Because I own everything. I've got to own this. This is on me today. And then I write out competence, commitment, competence, character, commitment, and connection. And I take a moment to just stop and reflect on all of the things I just told you. I just intentionally step back and allow space as I think about these things, just for God to bring things to my mind that I need to think about for the day, or things that are influencing me from the other days. I just take a moment and do this. And then I began to list out my items. I don't list them strategically always. I tried a format at one point where I did that, and then it just became too many lists to try to manage. I'm toying with a few apps like you probably do, and use one. But then again, it becomes another place for me to go and look at all the various tasks. So I'm still searching for a way to prioritize and manage well. This is very rudimentary, but I do it every day. And at the end of the month, I take those pages, I staple them together, and I put them in a file and keep them for the future. If I ever need to go back and look at them, I can pull it out. And so then these questions, I mentioned all of them, I think already. I won't mention them again, but I just stop and reflect on really what's most important today, and how does this involve my action, what I give my thoughts to, response to people who have asked for something. I just do a rapid fire list through my mind just to help generate. So it takes away the quadrant busyness, the email, the social media, all of the ways that I get connected like you are connected, sometimes challenging to keep up with. But these questions just help reframe, and I hit reset for the day and go through this as I fill out my sheet for the day. I found for me that this process helps me. It also has become a way for me to diagnose issues. And I've used this with the team I work with in the office. When issues come up, they can expect it now. And many times they offer it up. They don't wait for me to ask. But as I was trying to live into this leadership model, when issues would come up, I would, before giving any response, I would ask them, how do you see this? Is this issue because of competence or maybe incompetence? Is it a character issue? Is it a commitment issue? Is it a connection issue? And that simple diagnosis helps us then drill in to say, if it's any one of those issues, then what is the appropriate response to that? What's the posture we take? What's the action we take? How do I address this specifically? Because I know that the issue, what the issue is. The model probably should be much more complex than it is, but that's the model that I use and have found it to be helpful to me in my daily journey. I'm going to stop there.
Wow.
And just pause. And any of your stories that you resonate with this, especially your early ministry experience, good or bad. Some of you probably had a bad first leadership experience that also impacts. Maybe you were one of those that were thrown into a classroom to teach with no instruction. They just shoved you in, closed the door, and said, hey, you've got to teach this class today. And you were horrified by the, I don't know. But let me just pause there and would love to hear from you. What's going through your mind, what you're learning that could help me in this journey. And I would just say, I don't have, I think it's probably because I'm using two screens, the chat, to be able to see what some of the comments that may have been put in there. So sorry, I would read some of those if I did. So maybe there's something in there that could be shared. I'd be interested to hear some of those as well.
So Gary, here's some things. Charles Arison said his first experience was cleaning. Pastor Steve said board meetings with difficult people. He must have been outside the Church of the Nazarene at that stage. David Smith, Sunday school teacher. Brett Doniger, he ran sound when he was 11. First thing that popped in my head was I was asked to share a devotional for NYPS way back in the day. We would do that Sunday evenings. Brad Seller said his wife made him help with quizzing, LOL. So those are some of the things that were posted by people.
I posted, but I sent it only to Gary, I guess, instead of to everyone. But since he didn't get it, I was given the opportunity to be a Sunday school teacher at age 16. And in terms of your questions here, how was the best way to do it? I had no idea. How will I get it done? I had no idea. And who do I need to involve, or how do I need to get help? I had no idea. So it was quite an interesting time. I did learn from it, I think, and I wouldn't trade it for anything now, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, so if I could dig into that a bit, I learned through the years, and this was later on in my NYI ministry. It's one of those things I wish I would have understood early on, but I have observed a difference in leadership over the years from those that were needed, and I use that word very intentionally, those that were needed in the church versus those that were just wanted.
Mhm.
And of course, we're all wanted, so I don't want to intend that to mean nobody's wanted, but the difference is the wanted people are encouraged to sit on the front rows and, given some accolades, or maybe once a month they receive the offering, but the adults are all there to make sure it all goes well. All they have to do is get in the right place and somebody else does the hard work. There's a difference between people who are wanted and those who are needed. And I have met in my own, and I've not studied this is all anecdotal, but I've worked with hundreds of leaders around the world. But my observation is this, and I'm not necessarily condoning what happened to you either, Ken, because I think that is what I want to wrestle with, is you were needed, and maybe the others of you would resonate with that, to say you were needed in the church and you responded to that. And if you were young as a child, typically it was kicking and screaming and terrified, but that shaped you to be the kind of leader that can do anything, will accomplish anything. You have a deep sense of resiliency within you to keep at it, even though you want to quit. And that's the difference I've seen between those who are needed and those who are wanted. The ones that are wanted tend, and again, this is anecdotal, have a greater sense of entitlement mentality, are less resilient. So there's this goal, I think, for us as leaders to help people become needed, but how do we do that in a way that's developmental and helpful and thoughtful, reflective in that? What do you think?
Wow.
Sounds good.
If I can expand on that just a little bit, I think there's a combination of want and need together. My experience with my wife back in 2001, 2002, was the result of an overabundance of marketing the year before, where they only had 4 kids, and this year they had 50, and wrangling up 20 first through third graders, like trying to wrangle cats in a pool. But then my first assignment in pastoral ministry as an associate, the department was needed, leadership was needed in that department. And the pastor who asked me to step up wanted my skill set, but he didn't select that skill set until he saw me working in my Sunday school class or my children's quizzing program for 6 months. He wanted he was very specific on who he placed in what positions. So you could classify his staff members as wants, but they were all needs to begin with. I think as leaders, we need to balance that want and need. I don't know, just my observation from leading in retail and nonprofits and profits throughout 25 years.
That's good. And what I hear in that is you were invited in and were able to come alongside someone else. And so your wife in this case, is that, or were you on your own in a different area?
It was day one. It was kind of on our own. I'd have an experience teaching kids swimming lessons and soccer and like all kinds of different athletics sports. I know you look at me and you think, man, he is superly athletic, but there was once a day. But this was the year before I had a children's prison program of 4 kids. The children's pastor asked my wife and another lady to kind of promote it over the summer. And they did a really, really good job. It was 20 to 25 of the young group, 20 to 25 of the older group. And they were just outmatched. So both of us husbands were asked to come in and help. And all they really had was the leader's book and 1 student guide. So there wasn't much. We were all kind of blind going into it. But we learned on the fly. And I think the right people were in the right places at that time. As a matter of fact, the other children's quizzing that took the older group is an ordained minister in the Church of Nazarene at Grace in Clarksville. And she's one of those people that I lean on all the time.
Yeah, so my takeaway from that is the value you had of many people who were in your same situation. So you felt like you were in something together. You were learning together, sharing. You had a similar experience, and that helped you navigate that whole experience. What do others of you think?
Gary, as I reflect on my ministry, I never thought that when I was a young person through youth camps and, NYC, I went to Estes Park, and we were in a bus and traveled all the way to Colorado. I don't think I realized at the time the impact that those folks were making in my life. Now that I'm getting older, or I am old, I reflect, and I think I'm getting greater joy today, more on some of the staff people that I first brought on, and some of those things. And I don't think that sometimes pastors and leadership realize the longer term effect that they can have, especially in multiplication, by preaching about the call and some of those things. And so when I looked at some of your questions, I love the one, what's the most important conversation I need to have today? I'm almost afraid that with what we're experiencing now, that we're not having the conversations that we were having, because it takes a little bit more effort. So that question probably, and again, the most important things I need to do today, at least in my role, man, I'm responding to, phone calls all the time. But I think to be a little bit more proactive and say, what is it that I need to be doing? That takes some self-management. So I appreciate those questions.
Well, as you're thinking there, in leadership, I think how we get involved in leadership, that whole process also impacts us. And a story that I've told many times, I don't remember the source of where I got it now. It's been so many years ago, but a story about a king who lived in this beautiful castle and built a moat around the castle and was so proud of the castle and the moat and called all of the townspeople together. And they were on the banks surrounding on the outside of the moat. And the king spoke to them one day and said, look at my beautiful castle, my beautiful moat. This moat, no one can swim across. Nobody can make it alive. So there are man-eating fish in this moat. There's no one that can cross it. And so he held up a live chicken, and to prove his point, he tosses the chicken into the water. And when the chicken hits the water, these man-eating fish just devour this chicken, and there's this boiling water with all the activity, and within a few moments, all that's left are a few feathers kind of floating away, and people are stepping away from the water a bit, mothers clutching their children, saying, wow, nobody go near this water. And the king says to them, I am so confident in my moat that if any one of you can swim across this moat and make it alive, I will give you anything you want, up to half of my kingdom. And with that, all of a sudden there's a splash in the water, and there is this young man swimming across this moat. And again, the water begins to boil, and the man is squealing and obviously being bitten by these man-eating fish, but somehow he continues to swim across the water, and this activity continues. And finally, this young man gets to the other side and crawls out of the moat, and he's still alive, and he's scratched and bitten and bleeding, and the king is just speechless, but gathers himself and says to the people, this man's a hero among us. He's the bravest in our land. And so my promise stands. What would you like, young man? I'll give you anything you want, up to half of my kingdom. And the young man said, well, king, I would just like to know who pushed me into the water. And for many of us, that is an experience that I think, Ken, as you talked, that story came to my mind, that it's something we want to avoid. I think many of us, and maybe it was a particular era of the church, I don't know, but there wasn't as much training on leadership like we've had in the last few decades, but many leaders who kind of imbibe that story and say, yeah, it felt like somebody pushed me in. I wasn't brave. I didn't volunteer. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't feel like I was competent to do this, but somebody pushed me in. So there's this tension between helping people go a place where perhaps they're not yet comfortable going, giving them the support they need along the way to get there, but leading people to a new place. And I think that's the challenge of leadership for all of us, is helping. And of course, with COVID, I know that that's no more clear today than those in your church who are speaking about having an in-person service, and those who say it needs to be all online. And we've seen, tremendous tension there between those two. So how do you navigate congregations that are split, and in some cases either way, saying I'll go to another church unless you meet my need here? And it's a challenging day for us, and even more so for me. We've had similar kinds of challenges here in our office, which has made this journey for me even more valuable to work in a way that really helps me prepare for my day in such a way that navigates that tension. I don't know that everyone would ever be happy, but to navigate in such a way that it brings the best possible outcome. Any other thoughts?
When you first asked that question about what was your first job in the church, I've been thinking about that since you asked it. And I started attending the Church of the Nazarene at 17. And just over a year later, I was on the board as an NYI chairperson. And so I can't remember what my first job was because it all happened so quickly. And since then, I've of course answered the call to the ministry and just progressed through that. And I've had people from that church contact me in recent years and just in the last year or so and apologize for pushing me in so quick and just throwing me to the wolves. But I tell them, I say, I would not change it for anything because I wouldn't be who I am today or where I am today if it not had happened that way. But I am very intentional now to not do that to someone else because I know what I went through and preparing them and slowly introducing them, but also just being there as support. And I think that's the most important part is when you do push somebody past their comfort zone, but being there every step of the way with support and not just saying, well, it's your job now. So good luck.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. I think your words, I was going to ask, how would you do it differently? But you addressed that. You would introduce them and support them along the way. What does that support look like to you? How would, if you were to do that same thing today, how would you support somebody?
Well, my office door is always open. And so they can come to me, but also making that weekly phone call or a weekly in-person meeting with them, just saying, you know, what's going on? How did it go last week? What can I help you with this week? You know, what was some of the issues you had, you know, and just pouring out my experience with them and just taking them step by step and making that first contact before they have to come to me for help.
Very good. With a few minutes left, let me share a few other things. And then Tim, however you want to wrap it up, if there are other general questions that you want to talk about as we kind of had some conversation before this officially started today. But I want to share something that's been really encouraging to me. Again, it's been part of my search for a leadership model that helps me every day. And it's a story that's told by George Houston, and but originally written by Byron, and I'll show you these sources later, but lessons from flying geese that I have found really helpful, but even more so in this past year as we've sought to support people from a distance and without that face-to-face interaction that we've been accustomed to that does so many things to help our relationships. It's been more formalized through Zoom. But they're lessons from flying geese, and you've probably heard these before, but I think they're really valuable to be reminded of. But so Byron identifies these concepts that George Houston, who apparently has studied the daily behavior of geese, and came up with these lessons that I think apply to us. Fact number one is each goose flaps its wings, it creates uplift for the birds that follow. I want to be a person that creates uplift for those that I work with. Fact number two, when a goose falls out of formation, it suddenly feels the drag and resistance of flying alone. It quickly moves back into formation to take advantage of the lifting power of the bird immediately in front of it. And I found with COVID, you know, I felt like I've been out of formation, especially March, April, May. When we returned to the office in June, it was better, but still, it's not the same. There are meetings we have here in the building where we join by Zoom rather than face-to-face, just for the abundance of caution. But I don't want to fly alone. But as leaders, I've observed in my own life and others that it seems like the more pressure a person has, and that's probably not the right way to say it, but I've just seen leaders in the church who serve in different capacities, and some seem to work in isolation more than others. They start flying alone, get out of formation. They stop daily interaction. They're difficult to connect with. You get what I'm trying to say. I don't want to be a person that flies alone. I want to be vulnerable, open, accessible to the people I work with and live with. Fact number 3, went too fast. When the lead goose tires, it rotates back into the formation and another goose flies to the point. I learned that with the team I work with. In fact, we had a conversation yesterday with my leadership team. I told them a story of something that happened recently where I wasn't fit to do the best task for a negotiation we were doing in our office, and another person took the lead, and I fell back, and she did a marvelous job. It was the right occasion, and she led our team through something incredible that if I would have demanded that I stayed in the lead, we would have all suffered for it, and they would have let me do it perhaps. But I see this often, that sometimes, man, I need to rotate to the back and let others lead. Fact number 4, the geese flying in formation honk to encourage those up front to keep up their speed. So that's why we hear geese before we see them typically. That honking is very intentionally. It's the cheers, it's the raw, it's you go. And just that importance for us to be encouragers. And now perhaps we need 3 more encouraging statements for one in person, just because of what we're seeing with the impact of COVID, particularly in my world here, maybe yours, medical personnel, public educators, those that are in very challenging situations, they have a foot in 2 different worlds of in-person, of virtual, maybe 3 worlds, a hybrid, at just the level of exhaustion that I'm working at honking more and honking louder for people to say, look, I recognize that this is not easy. If it was easy, we would all fly alone, but we got to fly together. And so I'm gonna honk when I'm in the back. And then the 5th one, when a goose gets sick, wounded, or shot down, 2 geese drop out of formation and follow it down to help and protect it. They will stay with it until it dies or is able to fly again. Then they launch out with another formation to catch up with the flock. And of all of them, probably like you as a pastor, I've seen my share of fellow co-workers, colleagues that have fallen down, and some of them with nobody that went with them. And there's days I wish I could roll back the clock and reach out to someone who needed a friend, needed a colleague, and just too awkward, too embarrassed, I don't know, felt like it was unwanted. But I've come to value the need to have a level of commitment with one another, that when one goes down, a few go with it, just to help in that process of healing, recovery, and restoration. I think as pastors and leaders in the church, we expect to fall alone. We many times in my experience, again, this is just anecdotal, people don't give signs that they're about to fall until they just fall, and they drop out of sight. And all of the development, all of the things going on in their life leading up to that were masked or hidden. And then there was this sudden plunge, and then they were left alone, and that just made things worse. And so those statements are important. And I share this. I love this idea, going back to your first leadership experience, to mine, to how we impact people. But someone said you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but not the number of apples in a seed. And I think hearing a few of your stories today, the getting someone to help with sound, asking someone to lead in OI, asking someone to teach, asking someone to work in a VBS, asking someone to serve on a board or a committee, all of the things that represent asking somebody to go pick up chocolate bars for a fundraiser that probably lost money, All of those things are so important because you never know the number of apples in a seed. And perhaps like you, I've been in ministry since 1984, and I have some real surprise stories in my journey of people who I thought there weren't too many apples in that seed, but they turned out to be people that created more apples than I ever will. And people that I'd kind of discounted, had written off, tolerated, if you will, as a youth pastor. You know, be nice enough to be a good youth pastor, but guard myself because, you know, all of the behavior they were doing, like I did when I was 15 and being forced to go to church. But I've learned to just trust in God that the number of apples in the seeds that we plant are just unknown. And I'm sure people would say that about you. There are probably people you're around that they love to tell your story every time you're with them, you know, because you're an example of that. You're a person that brings this statement to life. And so with that, I'll share my sources here today, those that I've learned from, that these ideas have come from, and have helped me in my journey. So I appreciate the time. I'll stop there, Tim, since we're a little 2 minutes past, and whatever you'd like to do here.
So a couple things. Is it possible that you could share the PowerPoint with us?
Yes.
Okay, if you could do
Yeah.
that, and then I can just put that on the website. Some of them probably were taking great notes, but I know one or two probably were hoping I'd ask that. I think I'd like to then just open it up. If anybody's got a question, it's not every day you have the opportunity to talk to the General Secretary of the Church of the Nazarene. And I think before I do anything, are we still on target for General Assembly? Have we locked in Indianapolis? You know, we kind of like it close by, but what's the status of General Assembly?
Yeah, so the 30th General Assembly, we are in final negotiations with the city of Indianapolis for June of 2023.
Okay.
And we're finalizing the last 3 contracts came through last night. So today, this afternoon, we'll be reviewing some of the contracts. Our goal is to have the General Assembly firmed up by the end of November. So we've got about, 15 days or less than 15 days now to finalize that. But we're on target, even with the Thanksgiving period in there when we're closed and India's closed. But we're very happy about that. The city has been very good negotiating with us in the cancellation. We had 22 hotels that we used for a General Assembly. As you can imagine, 21,000 unique visitors at a General Assembly. But interestingly, the greatest service number attended was Sunday morning with 13,109, I believe. And so it's interesting how the attendance of 21,000 spreads out across the days. It will be a condensed General Assembly because the 2-week window that we typically require in a city was just not available. And so it will be condensed, likely an 8-day, including load in, load out. So it'll be a 6-day assembly for the public. And so I've been working with our ministry directors, NMI, NYI, SDMI, Board of General Superintendents, the General Assembly Commission, General Board Executive Committee, other leaders. Many have been involved, but we're in the final, we have rounded third and headed home, if you will, for the negotiation for June of 2023.
Mhm. Can I
Anyone?
ask what would be the major change? You've got to concise it, you've got to bring it down to 6 days, but there's got to be something probably going to be left out, or at least could you just talk about that a minute or two, or has that all not been decided yet?
And it's still in conversation, but we're looking at some of the areas of the conventions, the NMI, NYI, SDMI, and some of the gatherings that help support the plenaries that could be accomplished ahead of time virtually. So your caucus committee work, we're exploring that option. We're nowhere near making a decision, but if we can move some of that earlier, then that would help us focus on plenary content when we get to the General Assembly itself. And also have the conventions focus, possibly, again, all this discussion more on business, because there'll be somewhat of an overlap with the General Assembly, and then allow the General Assembly services to provide the inspiration, as each convention typically has had several worship services themselves, and they still may have some, but we're thinking that that might be condensed itself, and that we let the General Assembly stand as a corporate inspiration. Those are difficult issues because the return on the investment is important to delegates that come, both for the conventions and the delegates. But I'm hopeful, if you look at our formulas in the manual and you apply that to what we did in 2018 statistics, we have just about 8,000 delegates eligible for a General Assembly. But if you go back to 2009, we've had around 4,000 come for the 2009, 13, 17 conventions and assembly. So half of our eligible delegates come. So another focus for us is to increase our delegate participation or manage our formulas in a different way to have a more true representation. If we're only ever going to get half of the world together, what does that mean to how we go about our business as a denomination? But we're hopeful, though, to increase delegate participation, to bump up towards that 8,000, and then with greater overlap, there'll be more energy, more opportunity, more engagement with people in conventions and the assembly. That shorter time frame, the 21,000 that may come, there'll be more energy having them together in a condensed period of time than spread out over 2 weeks. So I'm working from that perspective, trying to, obviously there's a sense of loss anytime you make a change like this, right? To say we're not having a 2-week or a 10-day assembly, but it'll be a 6-day. And then what in return can we gain out of this that would bring perhaps to a place where with our financial future, our costs are reduced in this model. Obviously, we're using the convention center space less, our personnel costs go down, our production costs go down. It could be a better financial model for the denomination, but also perhaps a greater return in the energy of the thousands being together at one time.
Thank you.
Well, Gary, I want to say thank you for sharing with us. I think a lot of times we don't evaluate what we do day in and day out. And I know for myself, even in the midst of COVID, things have changed. Not always on the road like I was on the road. And there's been some good things that have come from that, but there's been a lot of challenging things. So I want to say thank you for helping us think about how do we do ministry, and how do we put the first things and the best things, I think, into practice. And very grateful for your leadership. And I believe that the church made a very wise choice in putting you in that role. And I think that for probably most Nazarenes, they don't probably fully grasp. I'm not even sure I fully grasp all of the pressures and responsibilities that are upon you. But I'd love to have a word of prayer with you. And just want to say thank you for you and your wife. And I know that there's been a lot of apples that have come from the seeds that you guys have scattered all across really the globe. So let me have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, what a blessing it is to recognize that we do not journey by ourselves. And Lord, as we think of those that maybe helped us have the first leadership responsibility that we had in the life of the church, and then we start thinking about people who have given us opportunities that have really led us to where we are today. And God, in all of these things, Lord, we are most grateful for godly people who have gone before us. But Lord, I also pray that we'll all consider our legacy, and that sometimes, Lord, we're so caught up in the moment that we're not thinking about our impact even 5 years from now. And so, Lord, I pray that you would be with Dr. Hartke, Lord, and his wife. And I pray, Lord, that in the midst of everything that they're doing, that they also stop long enough to reflect on all the ways that you have used them, and lives have been transformed, Lord, by their invitation to others to experience Jesus Christ. Lord, continue to bless the pastors on the Southwest Indiana District, especially those that are fighting COVID. And in all things, Lord, may we look to you as the author and the finisher of our faith. Amen.
Thank you all. Good to be with you.
God bless you. Hey, Gary, if you could make sure you give me host control, okay?
All right.
And everybody else, have a great day, and especially a great Sunday. This is a very important Sunday to remind people of all the good things to be thankful for the Lord. So take care.
All right. See you.
You.